Public school teacher comes clean about the consequences of lowering the standards of discipline and learning for minorities in American schools. Next on Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. This week we're going to discuss the topic of lowering the educational bar for black and minority students in public schools, and what the consequences of that are even beyond. To talk more about this, we welcome Stone Washington, a student at Clemson University and a reporter for the College Fix. Stone, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Duke. It's a pleasure.
Congratulations on that national title in football. That's a big deal, huh?
Oh, yes. Yeah, number one. Thank you.
Well, Mary Hudson, as you has written an interesting article in Quillette, the magazine journal Quillette. And the title of that is Public Education's Dirty Secret. It's not poor teaching or lack of money that is failing our most vulnerable populations. The real problem, she says, is an ethos of rejection that has never been openly admitted by those in authority. Why should millions of perfectly normal adolescents, not all of them ghettoized, resist being educated? I want to ask you about this. Talk a little bit first about the article. You've read it. What was your impression of what Mary Hudson had to say about schools?
Well, when I first read the article, it kind of took me for a shock that she was actually in a school system that allowed these students to just basically run wild and just kind of act in their own crazy way as if they were just hanging out with each other on the weekend. They literally, I know a couple times she said that students just talked to each other, looked at their phones, pretended like they weren't even in class, didn't look up at her while she was speaking. And I was really shocked by the level of just the lack of discipline that some of the students had when they, I guess, when they perceived that Mrs. Hudson was kind of insulting them or not. Just not kind of pandering to their interests. They actually gave her series of threats. I believe one was a black gentleman said that he was going to cut her ass or something. He said something crazy like that just when she just had, I think she gave him like just a mark on a paper or something. And he just said such a crazy, vehement thing to say to her. So I kind of was really taken aghast by the level and the lack of discipline that these students had, and that the school system would even allow just a fraction of that this misbehavior to be perpetuated at the school. I was just really shocked by it.
Well, how do you explain, Stone, the fact that so many so-called progressives, both in and out of education, I'm sure you have a number of them on your campus, I have them on my campus, seem to believe that requiring no standards in terms of behavior and discipline is actually going to produce better results for minority students than actually holding them accountable? It seems to me almost like a very soft-centered, paternalistic kind of racism to say, you know, we're gonna rather than hold kids accountable for their actions, rather than try to hold kids accountable and responsible for the material they're supposed to learn at school, we'd rather sort of get rid of discipline altogether so that chaos reigns, destroying education altogether, rather than creating an environment where those kids who want to learn can. What do you think accounts for that worldview from the progressive left?
I think you painted it very closely to what Mrs. Hudson was saying in their article. Really, she was saying that it's just that they think so less of the minorities, but particularly black students. They treat them as inferior, and then they give them a false sense of inferiority because of their skin color, but it's not really because of their skin color. It's actually because they've been programmed to think in a certain way that less is acquired or expected of them. So they live each and every year as deteriorating or living in a regressive state of education. So they learn a lot less than their peers would, and they wouldn't even try because less is expected of them, and then they hold that silent resentment, which not too many teachers pick up on, but it's a resentment or animosity towards these teachers because they're self-aware that they're not treated equally to their white peer or their friends around them, and they use that as a way to lash out against the teacher, speak out in public, and just act crazy. And so I just think that this system is very it's horrible. It just is counterintuitive to a stable education, and kids will only deteriorate further and further if they take away discipline or take away any punishment in the school system, which is built on respect, built on having a punishment for every crime that you commit, and being willing to be respectful towards your teachers. So I'm very disappointed in this system.
On top of everything else, on top of the dear letter advice from the Obama administration on easing up on discipline and the way progressive education mores have progressed, another thing that she points out is this recurring problem of certain minority communities having a stigma against learning. The idea that perhaps African American kids in schools who study hard and take seriously the lesson plans, somehow they're not acting quote unquote black. Have you experienced that, and what are your thoughts on that kind of internal pressure in the black community?
I haven't experienced it too much myself. I have, I guess, being near Detroit when I was in Grosse Pointe, there were a lot of black students that were allowed into my school from the Detroit area, even though they didn't live in my neighborhood. And my family, my whole father's side of my family grew up in Detroit, and I have interacted with a lot of students from that area, and it is a different world to see, just people who, I guess, like Mrs. Hudson referred to as just growing up in a ghettoized environment and having that just deteriorating school systems where they won't even have the expectations to perform like these other school systems do. And so I've seen people being brought into a more prominent school system like Grosse Pointe and being changed and transformed into reaching the highest potential, being a very smart student and participating very well in the class. And I've seen that kind of that divide, that light and dark divide in between a stable school environment that has strict discipline, strict requirements and expectations, and then also the Detroit school system, which is notoriously worse and known for a very troubled educational system.
Seems the one thing that all successful school students have, regardless of race or location, is structure. Right? Structure and a system that allows them to succeed is really what's necessary. And it just seems like lowering discipline, lowering responsibility, lowering expectations, it's going to have the opposite result, as Mary Hudson wrote so eloquently. Stone Washington, thanks for your time today, and thanks for sharing part of your story with us as well. Keep up the great work. We'll see you soon. All right, now time to shift to Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix assistant editor Dave Huber to talk more about lowering the bar for black and minority students in schools, especially when it comes to discipline. Talk a little bit about this Quillette article for me, Dave. As a former teacher, we're both teachers. You actually taught in public high schools. Does this sound familiar to you, what Mary Hudson's describing?
It definitely rang a bell. I ended up writing a weekend opinion piece on it. Mary Hudson's, she taught in and around Brooklyn, around New York, and a lot of what she said rang true. She was a foreign language teacher, as was I. Basically, I mean, she was dealing with, pretty much what we would say the politically correct mandates that come down from central offices through the schools about, keeping the discipline numbers correct. And that you have to understand, you have to take into account, cultural differences of minority students. And it's broken down from there. It's not just black or Hispanic. I mean, every subgroup you have to take into account their differences and take that into account. And then you have to take into account your own biases. And pretty much, her conclusion is that, it comes down to a bigotry of low expectations.
We know as teachers, without discipline in the classroom, without a respectful environment for the teacher and the students, without students who have enough discipline to want to learn, nothing's going to happen here. And really what these educrats did in arguing, the disparate impact laws, the changes to the Title IX that the Obama administration put forward, which basically suggested that because African American and Hispanic kids seem to be reported for trouble and for discipline issues and for not paying attention, not showing up, more than white kids, this was evidence of racism. And the way we fix that is to not really report at all. And so teachers and administrators and superintendents know that if their schools are actually trying to hold kids accountable, they could get in trouble. And so there is no way that kids are going to learn or want to learn in these classrooms.
Right. And that was the thing. As you mentioned, the Obama era guidelines pretty much said that if there was a disparate impact, a disproportionate discipline numbers, that was evidence that there was some kind of discrimination going on. Various workshops, in-services teachers had from the school and the central office level, even from the state level. It came down. I mean, a lot of the things were just, for teachers to examine their own biases. I mean, teachers were blamed. I've written about a program called Courageous Conversations. Our whole district was dealing with that from like the very first day. And we came in like first in-service day before the school year even started. And we were told that we had, we were basically, white teachers were all racist. We had to examine our, our deep down inherent biases. And because that's the main problem with dealing with discipline, dealing with minority children in the schools. Again, and we also had a gentleman also came in by the name of William Jenkins, who said, yeah, sure, teachers should, try to relate, obviously, as any good teacher would, with, their minority students, not just from their own cultures. But he also at the same time said that, and he wrote a book about it, that, minority children have to realize that they're going to have mainly white teachers. That's the case in, throughout the land in public schools. And they're there to help you. They're not there to give you a hard time and, ride you constantly. They're there to help you. So it's a two-way street. And again, if you're going to hold them to different / lower standards in terms of behavior, it funnels down into lower belief that you're not capable in academic realm.
The primary purpose of American public schools is no longer education. Education is somewhere 6th, 8th, 10th on the list of priorities. It has nothing to do with your kid's education, and nothing's going to get any better, like you said, because the system now is aligned for sociological, psychological, equity, justice issues, nothing to do with your kid's education. And maybe that's the best thing you can do, is unless more and more moms and dads pull their kids out, this nonsense is going to continue. Dave Huber, it's always a great pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for sharing your own experiences with us today, and we'll talk to you soon. It's funny how progressive educrats, educators, school administrators have really indemnified themselves from any and all racism. They're looking out for minorities. They alone, as progressives, have the answers. Their paternalistic approach to the minorities under their charge and in their schools is enough to verify whatever approach they take. The irony of this position is that the kind of racism and bigotry you're seeing from progressives in our schools is perhaps the most insidious kind, the most dangerous kind, and the most intolerable kind. We're basically saying in the American public school system now, and that extends into the universities too, that we're not going to hold African American and Hispanic kids to the same standards. Whenever there's a disparity or a gap between white or Asian achievement and those of other minorities, we're going to blame it on white privilege. We're going to blame it on institutional racism. We can't even enforce discipline in our public schools without getting called for our own implicit biases, as was pointed out a moment ago. And in this kind of a system, what's really bad, besides the racism of assuming that black and minority and Hispanic kids can't perform the same way, or that they're not intellectually as able to perform as white and Asian counterparts, what's even worse than that kind of paternalistic racism is the argument that the best way to fix this is to keep them innocent, to keep them unresponsible, and to keep them uneducated. That somehow, by not giving them an education by any means necessary, and then lowering standards overall for everybody, by giving them an entitlement series of social justice lectures that excuses their failure to learn any of the material, is actually going to help them down the road. To me, that's the worst aspect of this. It's not just that we're dooming them to second-class lives. It's the fact that we're making them believe that this is normal and owed to them. That's the biggest problem with all of this, and that's the final fix. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. For the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke, and we'll see you next time.